iHeart Nation, welcome back to the podcast where tonight we are jumping back into the depths of drama. You're going to need your own submarine to survive this one or get left at the bottom. Whatever happens, happens, but we're going to talk about it because our guy Jameis Winston getting disrespected again. Seems like a normal theme of Winston, no matter what he does. Nobody likes him. I really feel for the guy. That sucks. And as somebody who's rooted for his success, I want people to just start crapping on his name for no damn reason. But we're going to talk about that. We've got the reports of what Michael Thomas's incentives are if he is successful this season, what marks he needs to reach, and what that will translate to him in terms of financial guarantees. It's my money and I want it now. And we're going to go over, well, just a little bit of everything else. So welcome in, Hoodats. As always, love that you're here. Can't wait to chat with you, and we're going to break it all down. Good to see him, Mr. Jerry, Rudy Rock, James Grevall, funny guy Ben, TJ, Film making references to said submarine. Did it before I did. Shame on you. Lester, Brennan, everybody come on, who that in? Welcome in. I love it. And TJ, no, you're going to see, because TJ coming through says, James being disrespected just like that's cap. No, we're talking about literally getting disrespected by Marty Morningwig. And I'm going to say it's disrespectful. Why am I saying it's disrespectful? Because that man said that Marcus Mariota was a better backup quarterback. He said Cooper Rush was a better backup quarterback. He said Gardner Minshew was a better backup quarterback. That's disrespectful. I'm sorry. That is just disrespectful. DISRESPECT. Find out what it means to Winston. And look, I'm not trying to sit here and say that Winston is one of one. I'm not. I think that Winston has had multiple opportunities, and for a variety of reasons, it hasn't played out. But to say that the man is like the 7th or 8th best backup in the league is absolutely ridiculous. You know, the things that people will say, and look, you got to give respect. Let me give you Marty's background, by the way. Morningwig has actually had a very good career as a coach. Now, he's not been a very good head coach in terms of record. He's 5-27 as a head coach, and that's going back to the Detroit Lions all the way back in like 2001, 2002 era. But if you look at his history, this guy has been coaching the NFL for about 25 years, mostly as an offensive coordinator, assistant head coach. Most recently, he was with the Eagles again in like 2020. He's been out of the league for a couple years. And before that, he was the offensive coordinator with the Baltimore Ravens when Lamar Jackson first hit the league. So he obviously knows offenses, and he's got a good eye for, you know, building offenses, deploying them on the field, and having success. He's got some pretty nice, you know, numbers under his belt. If you go over like yards and points allowed, all that. I think he's got, let's see, top 5 point scoring offenses in his history. He's got like a dozen top 10s. I mean, he's definitely got a history of success there, but still it's wild to hear stuff like that. And it always makes me think of, you know, when we're sitting here from a New Orleans standpoint, well, maybe we're a little bit biased, right? You know, because we're in New Orleans, so we naturally want to side with our players. And I think that's fair for anybody. Whether you like or dislike Winston, I think one thing that Hell Saints fans are known for saying all the time is once a saying, always a saying, and very rarely does that get taken away from a player, right? I mean, generally, if somebody says you're a saint unless you do something like whip a belt out, insult people, or just like trash the community. You're with us forever. And it says something that I can literally manually, like individually name people who have lost that right. You know, the Eli Apples, probably Chauncey, the Junior Gallettes, right? Even Akeem Hicks to an extent. But generally speaking, every former Saint stays a beloved person. So there is a little bit of black and gold, you know, color glasses that can get put on sometimes. But I'm sitting here and like, I look at Gardner Minshew, who is on his, third team. And it's his entire career, when was he ever better than Jameis Winston was? And again, I'm not here to advocate that Jameis Winston's secretly an MVP player, none of that. But like, it all goes back to this level of, am I wrong because I cover the Saints, I'm unbiased, or is an analyst wrong for saying something that to me is mind-blowing, saying that Gardner Minshew and Marcus Mariota are better quarterback situations in terms of backup quarterbacks than Jameis Winston? Now, some of this might go to the old ideology. And Blair, so good to see you, man. So good to see you. Go back to the old ideology where there are truly, and I hope that this changes going forward. But there are so many people who count quarterback wins as this important, albeit, just above all stat. I think that's dumb. I am a very loud voice believing that wins are not a quarterback stat. I say that very often. I'm not saying that the most important position in the league, which is quarterback, does not correlate to wins and losses, but I don't think that could be given solely to quarterbacks. A great example of that is Drew Brees. Again, maybe this is just the black and gold colored glasses, but let's take it out. Dan Marino. I'm not going to throw great quarterbacks who had, close to or perfect mechanics and literally set NFL records to be the most accurate and comeback wins and all this other stuff for having the 32nd ranked defense multiple times. That's not fair. And that doesn't mean I'm trying to take away from Tom Brady, who had a top 15 defense almost his entire career. You have the success you had. Fantastic. Context matters, though. It's the same thing with the wins thing. Maybe that's what it is, because historically, Winston is a losing quarterback. He's 34-46. And for those listening, I did that in quotation marks, whereas Gardner Minshew is 8-16. So not super bad. He just lost a few games. Maybe that plays into it. And maybe that's what they're looking at Marcus Mariota. Maybe. The whole thing just seems silly to me. And I wonder, what is it about Winston that makes him just some guy that gets hated on so much? Because Mariota, as a starter, is 34-40, but who would compare Mariota's playing ability on the field and say this is markedly better as a quarterback than Jameis Winston? Who would say that? Minshew's actually pretty good? No, he's not, TJ. Anybody that's actually watched Minshew tape will tell you he's not good. In terms of high-end starting quarterback, not at all. Nobody would make that argument for Gardner Minshew. Minshew would make that daggum argument for you, let alone anybody else. Minshew mania is because he had one amazing season out of nowhere, right? And I'm not trying to discount that season. His coming into the league year, his rookie year, he had like a 21-5 TD year and looked really damn impressive in 12 games as a starter. And then it fell all apart the next year, and it never recovered because of what I always try to preach to people. Film doesn't lie. They learn your tendencies, they dissect you, they tear you apart, and you're never the same again. At least with a guy like Winston, you've got, 7 years worth of starting. You have consistency there. Good and bad, you've got consistency. And whether you're an amazing starter versus an amazing backup, it still matters based on how good you are at the position. And I sit here going, talent-wise, who is truly better as a backup quarterback in the NFL going into this next season than Jameis Winston? I mean, I can name a couple guys who I think are very reliable, quality backups. For example, Tyrod Taylor with the Giants. I think he's shown throughout his career that is a quality backup. Not starter level, but I would still say is not as talented as Jameis Winston. Maybe more consistent, even if the ceiling is lower. Andy Dalton, I mean, we literally saw what he was last year and worse than Jameis Winston, but still, it wasn't like Winston was blowing the roof off the doors. That phrase didn't make any sense. Playing injured, right? So, talent-wise, how can you sit there and say that you got a guy barely top 10? And that's why I broke it open as disrespectful, right? When you look at a guy in terms of talent and you really look at the backup position, you need a guy who, if he has to come in, you have a chance of still winning the game. If anything, you want a backup quarterback who makes you feel like you still are the favorite team to win the game if he has to come in. I don't see that for almost every backup quarterback in the NFL. I certainly don't see that for Gardner Minshew at all. In fact, Gardner Minshew in like 40 games of playing has only got 3 game-winning drives in his whole markup. Like, that's not him. That's not his profile. Like, that's Derek Carr's profile. Like we talked about coming in is really weird because Derek Carr historically performs way better in the fourth quarter than just about anybody. Like, that's just where he turns it off, where he's cold everywhere else. And still, that confuses me to this day because it makes no damn sense. But Gardner Minshew, is he the same way? You actually go look at his splits, and I'll pull them up and tell you right now when it comes to like game situations, trailing, passing. And in fact, when they're trailing, he is not magically better. Surprise, surprise. He is not a magically better quarterback in the fourth quarter. In fact, his worst quarterback rating is the fourth quarter. He is not a clutch guy. He is not a guy that you can just lean on and rely on to make things happen. And I'm not arguing that Winston is secretly amazing. That's not the argument. But the argument is a guy talented enough to create a winning atmosphere or maintain a winning atmosphere when he has to come in. And Winston has proven that he can do that. For years, good and bad, Winston has proven they can do it. And by the way, Winston's fourth quarter ratings are not his worst ratings compared to other quarters. And you go to Winston's profile, basically every year he's been a starter, he's led game-winning drives. Every single year. Not been a year without it. The only year he doesn't have a game-winning drive is 2020, when he only played in 4 games, didn't start a single one, and threw 7 passes, and he was just completely backing up Drew Brees. Every single year, he has had game-winning drives. He has the wherewithal to win you football games. Is he elite? No. But the disrespect coming out of people like Morningwig's mouth saying that there are basically 8-10 guys better as a backup, to me is just kind of silly. And if you want to have one or two up there because you prefer reliability or even one name, or even if you're in the chat saying, yeah, Gardner Minshew, even though I think most people only know Gardner Minshew from highlight videos instead of just like horrible decision making. And I can even pull up some of the games that led him to getting kicked from Jacksonville and why they were like, yeah, we'd rather tank for Trevor Lawrence than keep this guy around because the decision making was just atrocious. You can see that when a guy plays, right? And I don't see that same thing with Winston. When you look at him play, you don't see the most amazing quarterback on the field, but you also see a very talented player who has the ability to win you football games with your team. So that's kind of why it's a little wild to me. You know, you see this. You see these type of posts. You see these offseason articles, and they are offseason articles, right? They are what they are. But it's still shocking to me that if you're going to claim that you cover the entire league, fine. You at least got to make a statement that makes a little bit of sense. And there are guys out there that I would have accepted as an answer as a backup more than Gardner Minshew. The biggest one that I would have said, if you want to say this is the best backup in the league, I would personally take Jacoby Brissett as the best backup in the league. He has played in multiple teams, multiple systems, and he's never been good enough to be a full-time starter and that you just want to be there. But every time he has come in, he's been reliable. He's been a backup who's probably going to be the next Chase Daniels type. And I'm okay with that. But I still can't name 7 or 8 guys I'd rather have as a backup. I can't name 5 guys I'd rather have as a backup than Jameis Winston. Assuming he's healthy, which he looks it. Right? We're really going to sit here and act like Winston's decision-making is a strength. And see, Jimbo, this goes back to what I say. Watching everybody else. Because as bad as you might think Winston is, Minshew's decision-making is far worse than Jameis Winston. Watch his games. Break down his tape. It's atrocious. I've done this. I actually have a good friend who does this for Jacksonville, and I get to see her posting stuff all the time. And I've gone and watched it myself. Minshew is bad, which is why he had that spur up 1 year and then so quickly fell from grace and is now a nobody backing up with the Colts. God, where is he now? Yeah, he's the backup for the Colts. If the guy's decision-making was that good, if people thought that he had the decision-making to be a full-time NFL quarterback, he would not be on his 3rd team in, 4 years after just 2019 supposedly setting the league on fire. Again, this is why stats are so dangerous. Box score scouting is so dangerous. We're talking about who's a better quarterback as a backup. Your best backup is going to be the guy that gives you the best chance to win a football game if he has to come in. I can promise you that Winston gives you a better chance to win a football game than Gardner Minshew. Gives you a better chance to win a football game than Cooper Rush, which, cool. Cooper, great story. Let's see how it works out. Long term. I'm here for it. Anyway, that's the disrespect thing, and I'm here for chat. Let's get to chat. Kalen, good to see you. Glad that you're enjoying the beard. Appreciate you. Let's see. Don says Winston can win you games, but almost no other backup can do that like what he did in ATL last year. Have to agree. And let's see. Joseph says Jacoby Brissett is who he would take. I'm completely fine with that. I think that's completely legit. I mean, again, if you want to pick out one or two names, completely fine. Mr. Don says Tyrod Taylor can't throw downfield. I don't call quarterbacks good if they can't push the ball downfield at least somewhat. That feels a little bit disrespectful to Drew Brees at the end of his career, but I feel you anyway. I just think that if it comes down to who can win you games, which is what you're supposed to do, anytime we talk about depth, no matter what position, the whole idea is that player who has to step in, how much of a step back are you taking, and can you still win games for them, or are you covering them up? And a good example of that is look at Saints positions just over the past decade. There are players that you can name that were backups that had to be covered up. Like you were scared if they came into the game. P.J. Williams playing boundary corner is an example. Corey White is an example. There are multiple players that if they came in, you went, damn it, we're done. Like that position, cooked. We don't know what's going to happen, but it ain't good. This is why I see these type of articles and I get kind of like, really? Because you can't say that about something like a Winston, and you can't say that about a guy like Jacoby Brissett. Like, if there is a proven ability to come in, even in a backup situation, and contribute and provide because you are a high-end player for where you're at, being the best backup doesn't mean you're suddenly a great starter. But I think that is where I kind of came into this episode, really wanted to discuss this because TJ says Jameis under Sean had to be covered up, and that's just factually inaccurate. I think TJ is a good example of there is a growing section of Saints fans who just probably are tired of hearing the name Jameis Winston, so they just want to hate him for the sake of hating him. And it's fine. You're allowed to do whatever you want to do as a fan. That's the cool thing about being a fan. But realistically, Winston was good. It's why Winston won the starting job. It's why Winston won the starting job multiple years. Now, because it never panned out is one thing over the other, but that says a lot about a player. And to put him in the same sentence as guys who are flaming out and might not even be in the league in a year, a little rough for me. You'll say, what was the cornerback that came in for the Super Bowl and got burnt first play? You are thinking of the Jason David appearance after we pick him up from the Indianapolis Colts. That was wonderful times. That is wonderful times. Going back to one of first, and that wasn't a backup situation. That was a scheme situation where he clearly worked in one place and not in the other. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. That was a rough time to be a Saints fan. Wall says Jameis Winston will be the next Geno Smith if he can sign with the right team. Winston isn't a West Coast quarterback. The vertical game is a strength. I would disagree because even coming into the league, Winston was a West Coast guy, and even now is a West Coast guy. Just because you can push the ball doesn't mean you're not West Coast. Tell by that argument, most of Drew's early years wasn't West Coast. But could he still be that guy? I don't know if he could. But what I will say confidently, I think that Winston puts New Orleans in a better position if Derek Carr goes down than just about anybody else out there. In terms of backup quarterbacks who can come in right now and win a football game with the team and not be a hindrance, but to be as much of a help as you can losing your starter, I think he's that guy. And I can't say that for a long list of names in the NFL. But that's just where I personally stand on it. And that's completely okay if anybody disagrees. Larry says he's talking about Usama Young burning one plate in the Super Bowl. Oh, man. I thought you were talking about when the Colts won the Super Bowl and we picked up Jason David, expecting him to be amazing. But yes, Usama Young having to come in, got burned on the first play because Peyton Manning targeted him, and that was definitely rough. Now, fun fact, just to give you a random offseason history lesson, Usama Young actually ended up being in the league for, I think, 8 years. After New Orleans, he was with 2010. He went to Cleveland and then Oakland and was actually a starter for both Cleveland and Oakland. Played, I just hit it up on Pro Football Reference, played 99 games. In fact, I kind of feel bad for him. Like, literally sign him to a one-game contract right now. Like, imagine ending your career at 99 games. That's got to be frustrating. The OCD in me would go crazy. But played 99 games with full-time starter for the free safety with Cleveland for 2 years. And then back up in Oakland before he rolled out the league. So, yeah. Wow. And yet we all remember him because of that one big play in the Super Bowl. One big play in the Super Bowl. So, NTR says Winston just kept being hurt. He had flashes of good if he could stay healthy. The potential was there with the right coach. I think the issue, though, is at this point, I don't know if we can ever argue that Winston will be healthy. You reach a point, and I hate the word injury prone, the term injury prone, because it's so overused, but you're talking about the guy having multiple setbacks over the past 3 years, turning 29 years old now. I don't know if he is ever going to be a healthy 16, 17 game quarterback. I really don't know if Jameis ever has that left in him. I do think that he could still be a backup for several years, but I really don't think that if he was on the market, anybody gives him a chance to be a starter. And I think you kind of saw that in, the past 2 off seasons even. I mean, there was some interest last year. I don't really think there was anything this year, and it's just keep him in New Orleans and let him be the best backup you can be. It's the same thing I say about Michael Thomas, though, so I'm not being unfair. I think Michael Thomas can come back and contribute, but I don't ever see Michael Thomas being an all-pro again. And damn it, I hope he is, right? Like, I do hope that he becomes that. And just to give you some segue on Michael Thomas, Nick Underhill actually posted a breakdown of all of his incentives going into this year. So here's what he can earn extra if he hits certain marks. If he gets 100 receptions, $250,000. 10 more receptions than that, another $250,000. 10 more than that, $250,000. So he has a maximum $750,000 in cold hard cash he can earn just by catching 120 passes. I don't expect him to catch more than 70 or 80, but if he does, fantastic. Receiving yards, 1,000 yards or more, $250,000. 1,150, $250,000. 1,300 or more, $250,000. So another 750 yards if he can go above 1,300 yards receiving. Now, basically, if he can return to all-pro form, he's getting several million more dollars. Let's keep going. If he gets 7 touchdowns or more, $250,000 in the bank. Now, I would say this is the easiest one for him to get. The easiest one, in my opinion, for him to reach is this one right here. If he gets 7 touchdowns or more in a season, $250,000 transferred to his bank account. Congratulations. I think that's the easiest one for him. And he's done that in the first 4 years of his career. He did that 3 times. And I think that's even with, at various points, me feeling like they didn't use him enough in the red zone. I think they can do that now with a little bit less fear. That should be the easiest one. But let's keep going. Pro Bowl / playoffs. If selected on the initial ballot and the team makes the playoffs, $250,000. So if he makes the Pro Bowl and the Saints make the playoffs, another $250,000. If he gets receptions, yards, and a Super Bowl win, so 110 receptions, and the Saints win the Super Bowl, $500,000 into his bank account. And individual marks. If he gets All-Pro First Team, $500,000. If he gets Super Bowl MVP, $500,000. If he makes Offensive Player of the Year again, $1 million. And if he somehow makes NFL MVP, $500,000. So in total, you've got right at $5 million in incentives that he can earn this season. That's a lot of incentives. Realistically, I think he's got one that I really feel confident that he can make, and that's it. I could be wrong, but I feel like he's going to make one. That's going to be the touchdown one. The others are a maybe. You do have a 17-game season. So if we work under the theory, and I'm going to say theory because I'm not trying to be rude, I'm trying to be honest, intellectually honest. You just don't see guys coming back from the level of injury that he is and scoring lots of touchdowns and catching lots of passes, and you don't see him staying healthy. But if he was to play 17 games, he would only need to average 6 catches a game to hit his reception incentive. And to hit his yards incentive is honestly a little bit easier even. He'd only need to catch 59 yards. 6 receptions, 59 yards is the average he needs to make the minimum incentive for his receptions and yards, which would give him another $500,000. So it is possible. I think that because history has taught us that it's very difficult, I'm not going to say it's going to happen. I want it to happen. But 30 years old, multiple injuries, I'm not going to say one thing about one guy and then come over here and say the exact opposite about another. So if I'm going to critique Winston and say that I don't believe Winston ever gets a chance to be a starter again mainly because of injuries and other things. I'm not going to give Michael Thomas the benefit of the doubt either. But he has the opportunity to prove it, whereas Winston doesn't. Like, there's no shot that Winston's a starter this year unless something, God forbid, happens to Derek Carr. Michael Thomas is going in as the planned starter. He has an opportunity to make this. And I would say that if he makes 100 catches and over 1,000 yards and 7 TDs, it's also quite possible he makes it to the Pro Bowl. I doubt he makes All-Pro, but it is possible. I think the easiest one for him to make is the touchdowns. And if he's going to make the reception and yards one, he needs to average, if you're curious about it, he needs to average 6 receptions, 59 yards, and half a touchdown per game to reach another $750,000 in cool cash throughout the season. That's really not bad. Like, that's not difficult numbers for a healthy, quality receiver to make, right? You don't have to be an elite receiver in the league to make those numbers. And I'm not trying to say that like insultingly. I'm really not. I think that's a good thing for him. I hope that leads to him being a successful player this year. To give you a reference, though, 22 players in the league last year had 1,000 receiving yards or more. 22 of them. That's a lot. And I bet my bottom dollar that everybody listening to this podcast can't name all 22, because I certainly couldn't. I know I couldn't. In fact, looking at the list now, I would have missed out because I didn't realize that Tyler Lockett made 1,000. I didn't. I knew he was probably in the 8,900 range. Didn't realize he actually hit 1,000. I didn't know that. I legitimately didn't. I'm looking at the list now. There are guys that I thought would have made it that didn't. I would have honestly thought DJ Moore made it. But DJ Moore was targeted 120 times, but he only caught the ball 63 times. So a 53% catch rate will do that to you. I thought that he had actually gotten more there. You know, DK Metcalf, 1,000 yards. Now, see, that one I would have got, but Tyler Lockett I wouldn't have. So 22 guys last year did it. It's definitely possible that MT can. It just gets harder the more you escalate those numbers. Keytros, if he makes, put your foot in your mouth with butter. Well, that's the thing, Keytro. How am I saying anything insulting about Michael Thomas? In fact, I've been very vocal of how much I support him. I'm just being realistic. How many 30-year-old receivers coming off 2 years, technically more, but just to say 2 years of significant injury, have gone on to have 100-yard or 100 reception season, 1,000 yards, made the Pro Bowl, and gotten 10 touchdowns? Very few. In fact, of those 22 names who got 1,000 yards last year, only 2 of them were 30-plus. Devontae Adams, 30 years old. Tyler Lockett, 30 years old. Nobody else, wide receiver, had 1,000 yards last year that was 30-plus. In fact, the average age seems to be around 23. A bunch of young pups doing it. The Justin Jeffersons are doing it. The Jalen Waddles are doing it. The Garrett Wilsons are doing it. The Jamar Chases, the Chris Olaves, T. Higgins, Brandon Ayuk. Those are the guys pulling it off. Now, there are some older guys. I'm just saying. I'm not being disrespectful. I was being pragmatic. Realistically, it's not likely. But I definitely want him to hit those marks. That's why I like seeing his incentives. I want to see if that grind can bring him back to that. Definitely want to see it. DJ Moore had an awful quarterback situation. He's going to Chicago, where passing production goes to die. I do think that DJ Moore is potentially hurt statistically by his quarterback situation. Not even potentially. He is. But I still would have thought that he was a 1,000-yard guy. Michael Thomas built different. He'll be back like the Terminator. We say that all the time. You know who I said that about too? Brian Shaw, 4-time world's strongest man. And he came in like 8th place this year. Stuff happens. You get old. You don't recover as well. You're not as good as a 22-year-old. That doesn't mean Michael Thomas is bad. That's not what I'm saying. But to expect him to hit all $5 million of his incentives is really difficult. But if he can do it, fantastic. But it's not a lie, and it's not being an ass to say that the odds are definitely stacked against him. Most of y'all have no idea who Brian Shaw is, but if you follow Strongman, I'm big in the world's strongest man. And dude's a hoss. Like, Brian Shaw throughout the 2010s is arguably one of the greatest world's strongest man competitors ever. And this was going to be his run for the 5th and also his final run because he is getting a little older. Dude didn't even place in the top 5. So, and you can't definitely say that he wasn't hungry. So, all this to say, hey, I'm rooting for MT. But the player that I think gets the most receptions and the most yards is Chris Olave. I do think that Michael Thomas can definitely be a high-end contributor here and get a lot of that. The touchdowns are what I think he has the best chance of capitalizing on and getting incentives. And it's exactly what TJ says. I don't doubt MT's motivation at all. I don't. MT's a dog, and he's a guy that I hope retires. I really do. Retires New Orleans Saint. I hope he's a Saint his whole career. But at the same time, you doubt his body, right? And more specifically, let's throw this in. I doubt the Saints medical staff. Because for whatever reason, I doubt anybody working in the medicinal field in Louisiana that deals in sports medicine. Like, I really wish we could outsource our sports medicine in like Canada or something. Because there's just a problem down here. And I'm adamant about that. Don says Brian Shaw's the guard who used to throw Shaq a lot of lobs in the 90s. Brian Shaw is old. I don't know if he's that old. Brian Shaw, how old is Brian Shaw? He's 41. Damn, he actually is older than I thought he was. 41. But great dude. He's 6'8". I mean, he goes into competitions weighing like 400 pounds. He's got one more competition before he wraps up his career, and it's the Shaw Classic. He's actually started his own the World's Strongest Men competition system, like, are all fully endorsing. He's just that big of a name. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. And I'm with TJ. Like, I feel shitty for Thomas because I really do. And I've said this. Michael Thomas, when he was hitting his prime, Hall of Fame career immediately, like 2019 is still the best individual wide receiver season that I've ever studied on tape. Period. I've never seen a receiver dominate like he did in 2019. And people are going to say, oh, well, they were all short passes. First of all, that don't mean anything. Because if you catch 150 balls, somebody should have been able to stop you. Somebody. Like, somebody. If you want to say they were all slants and crossing patterns, then how come nobody stopped slants and crossing patterns? His 2019 campaign as a wide receiver is the best I've ever studied when I was doing scouting. Like, hands down. I really think that if he had just 2020 and 2021, he didn't miss. He's a Hall of Famer. Like, ridiculously good player. I hope he gets back to just a fragment of that. We'll see. We'll see. So, yeah. Lakers, Brian Shaw must be dang near 60? Probably. Now, Brian Shaw, the world's strongest man, did play basketball, but never that good. It was never that good. The game he put up against Marcus Peters masterclass, that Rams game was fantastic. In fact, let me look real quick because I am curious. Career game logs. What is the game with his best individual performances? And it is that Rams game. I was curious. 12 receptions, 211 yards, 1 TD. But honorable mention, 2019 where he had 182 versus Tampa. Wow, actually I didn't realize this. He has 2 games in his career where he put up a $180 against Tampa. Once in 2018 and once in 2019. That's pretty impressive. He has 21 games with 100 yards or more. That's impressive. That's impressive. Man, that Rams game. We're going to have to pull that tape and go watch it sometime. That's fun. And exactly, Intar. This is why freak injuries are terrible. Who'd you have on the Saints Mount Rushmore? Drew Brees, Ricky Jackson, Cameron Jordan. And that last one's always tough. Like, honestly, God, the last one, because you sit there and you've got 10 names who can go on there. I hate doing pauses in a podcast because it's a podcast, but like, I want to say Willie Rofe. I could say Jari Evans. I mean, these guys are going to be Jari doesn't make the Hall of Fame. Something's really wrong. Hell, Sam Mills is in the Hall of Fame, but I probably wouldn't put him on my Mount Rushmore. That's tough, man. That's Drew Brees, Ricky Jackson, Cameron Jordan. And that last spot's tough for me. That last spot's tough. Gotta be Peyton. I mean, if we're including coaches, then Sean Payton. I typically don't include coaches. I think they're their own thing. But if you're including coaches, then Sean Payton, Drew Brees, Ricky Jackson, Cameron Jordan. If we're including coaches, Sean Payton's on there no matter what. Only coach to win you a Super Bowl. Got to be on there. Joe Horn. Look, I love Joe Horn. Joe Horn is the second best receiver in Saints history, in my personal opinion. I know some Saints fans don't like hearing that, but in my opinion, Joe Horn's the second best receiver this team's ever had. I still wouldn't put him on the Mount Rushmore. 7 amazing years in New Orleans. Still wouldn't put him on the Mount Rushmore. So I would take Joe Horn over Colston every day of every week of every year. And Colston was fantastic. Colston is my 4th best Saints wide receiver of all time. Again, I've got a take there that I know a lot of Saints fans don't agree with, but he is, in my opinion, the 4th best Saints receiver of all time. I think a lot of Marcus Colston's just like fanfare. And again, he was a good, very good wide receiver. It's the fact that he played with a Hall of Fame quarterback in his prime and a Hall of Fame coach in his prime. Doesn't mean I think Colston's bad. Not at all. But Colston at no point was ever a top 5 receiver any given year. Never once. Again, I don't think that he's bad at all. But Eric Martin is number 3. Joe Horn's number 2. Michael Thomas is number 1. That's who I would have. And I do agree that Colston is underrated. 100%. Joe Horn was doing what Colston was doing with Aaron Brooks and Jeff Blake. Danny Abramovich would probably be 5th. Danny Abramovich was your first wide receiver to ever make an All-Pro. But you're also going back to the 60s. How do you compare, that's real tough. But Michael Thomas, then I go Joe Horn, then I go Eric Martin, who most Saints fans have forgotten about because, again, we go back to like awful quarterback play. Remember who his freaking quarterback was. He was having 1,000-yard seasons, and he had freaking Bobby Hebert throwing him the damn ball. Anybody that wants to sit here and try to say that Bobby Hebert was good can just argue with somebody else because you're never going to get me to say that Bobby Hebert is a good quarterback. Dude was a 1 TD to 1 interception average guy. Nope. He was just a run-of-the-mill starter in the time. So, yeah. Lattimore's on my Rushmore, to be honest. He's by far our best cornerback. I would agree that Lattimore's your best cornerback ever, but he's not on my Mount Rushmore. You remember Eric Martin because you're kind of old? That's okay. That's okay. I'm cool with that. Put whoever you want on there. But like we talk about context a lot. We're talking Saints. Michael Thomas definitely benefited from the end of Drew Brees' career, but it's definitely the end of Drew Brees' career. And he dominated and he carried offenses. Colston was a great piece of those offenses, but I think that those offenses would have kept on clicking had Colston not be there. And I'll be honest with you, the biggest reason that Colston is not my number 1 is because Colston wasn't the number 1 for multiple years in his prime. In his prime. People forget, Jimmy Graham was the focus of the offense from a receiving standpoint for multiple years. Never once was anybody ever the focus except Michael Thomas. In fact, Michael Thomas was so much the focus, he ran off another 1,000-yard receiver because he said, I'm going to be the big dog. You can be second dog. You can get the hell on. And Brandon Cooks got the hell on. So the fact that Michael Thomas and his health and his peak was always the focal point of the receiving game, and Colston was not, but Joe Horn was and Eric Martin was, is why Colston falls down my list. So Jimmy Graham plays tight end. Yeah, Jimmy Graham plays tight end. Correct. He's also a receiver. Tight end is a receiving position, very similar to split end. They both line up on the line of scrimmage. They both have similar route concepts. Yes, it is its own unique position, but at the same time, in terms of the receiving game, passing concepts, usually they're not your favorite target. It actually says a lot that the tight end is your favorite target. And again, I'm not saying Colston sucked. I'm saying that Colston, as great as he was not the focus in the middle of his prime of the offense. You can't say that about Eric Martin, Joe Horn, or Michael Thomas. They were the focus in the receiving game. We're getting them the ball. Not the case for Colston, even though Colston's amazing. I do believe he should have made a Pro Bowl at least once or twice. So, if you look at our schedule, it's funny because there isn't a quarterback on our schedule that is better than Carr. We'll see, Taylor. I'm a big fan of reminding everybody that every year you have guys who improve, guys who get worse, and teams as a whole do this. And that's one of the reasons I love the NFL is just because the team was good last year doesn't mean they're good this year. And just because the team was bad last year doesn't mean they're bad this year. So on paper, we look at the schedule and go, oh, yeah, the Saints have got this. They should be great. Right? We all do that. And then on paper, that's sure. But that's not how it's actually going to translate. I'm not saying that the Saints are going to, just fall over and be terrible and that secretly the Carolina Panthers are going to win 11 games. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that when you look at the schedule, there are people that I know have written off like the Chicago game. They've definitely written off the Texans game. Some people have written off the Colts game as an easy win, even LA. And I'm sitting here going, let's wait and see. Right? There's up and there's downs. And we'll see how those play out. I mean, there's people who've completely written off Tampa. And while I do think that Tampa's the weakest roster in the division, it's still a division game. And you still better win it. So I'm not writing anybody off. And I don't buy into strength of schedule before a season starts. I used to. If you go listen to old Who Dat Confessional podcast, I did that. I did used to really buy into strength of schedule before the season started. I don't anymore. I've learned the wicked error of my ways. So I look at the division. I think that Carolina's the one that scares me the most. I think Atlanta's the one that could win the most in terms of go toe-to-toe with New Orleans. If Carolina gets all their crap together, they're the scariest. It's really more about how quickly Carolina can pop off. And Tampa, I don't worry about, but I still think they could play spoiler. So we'll wait and see. I'm not super confident in Atlanta's ceiling, but I think that they put together, a good core of veterans to build around their team. But I don't think they have anybody that's special. But we'll see. They could come out and punch me in the face because I've also been very vocal that you don't take running backs in, the first round of the NFL draft because it doesn't equate to you winning football games. Well, they went and did it. If they win 11 games, they're going to be punching me squarely in the mouth with my philosophy. Because I am a firm believer that if you draft a running back in like top 10, you're not winning more games than you did the past year. Like I've just been a very staunch speaker of that. We'll see how it ends up actually playing out. So there's always a team that bad before it jumps up and wins 10 games, vice versa. Happens every year. Correct. Happens every year. It's actually one of the reasons I love the NFL so much is because you can't easily predict who's going to be great this year based on who was great last year. You just can't. I love that. What about Reggie Bush? Reggie Bush is not in my top 5 running backs of the team. I love Reggie. Fantastic player. He's not in my top 5, let alone my overall New Orleans Saints history rankings. Not even in my top 5 running backs. So now, how do we want to define that? Like, are we talking just running backs or X factors, right? Because Reggie Bush was also amazing as a punt returner, great as a receiver, okay as a running back with the Saints. So, I mean, I guess how much do you spread that around, right? Like how much do you open that up? We're talking about guys who are X factors. The only person I might take above Reggie Bush as an X factor is Taysom Hill. But at the same time, Taysom Hill's not in my top 20 of quarterbacks. Now, I know that sounds disrespectful to some people. He's not in my top 20 as a quarterback, but as an X factor, I don't think there's ever been a player, with the exception of Darren Sproles. So I'm actually going to knock Taysom down real quick. Darren Sproles, then Taysom Hill as an X factor. That's the list. Like, Taysom is second only to Darren Sproles as a Saint. So depends on, how you make your list and what qualifies. But as a pure running back, now Reggie's not even in my top 5. So, yeah, my top 5 running backs would be Deuce, Ingram, Kamara, George Rogers, and Pierre Thomas. And then I'd still go Dalton Hilliard, Chunk Muncie, Ricky Williams, Ruben May. Hell, Ricky Williams, man. Imagine if Ricky Williams came in the league right now where we are more acceptable to things like marijuana. We understand social anxiety and all that and mental health a lot better than we did 25 years ago. Good Lord. Ricky Williams would be a freaking dog in today's league. A dog. But that man was just in the wrong era. I'm tripping, Joseph. Ingram is your leading rusher in touchdowns and yards. Ingram will constantly be undersold by a lot of Saints fans. But hell, your best, maybe second best defensive player of all time, Cameron Jordan, said Mark Ingram's the best running back the team's ever had. So it's not like I'm the only one saying it. Mark Ingram is an amazing running back. He's not an amazing X factor, but as a running back, there's a reason he holds all the records. So, but I wouldn't take, Mark Ingram as the best X factor for the team. Definitely not. Darren Sproles, who set an NFL record, by the way, which still stands to this day, is the guy. Deuce still one of the best running backs for the Saints? Oh, hands down. Deuce is another guy that we talk about injuries robbing him of his career. Deuce got robbed. Now, part of the problem for Deuce McAllister is the fact that he was a bell cow, and bell cows don't last very long. Deuce McAllister had 2 seasons where he rushed for over 300, he had over 300 attempts. No coincidence, he didn't last long after that. The body wears down fast. If you look historically, when a running back has over 300 carries, typically that is their apex. Joe says, don't know how. How long did it take to have a 1,000-yard season? Well, his first 3 years in the league, Sean Payton only used Mark Ingram as a short yardage back. That's it. He only used him in short yard situations. So 3 years of his career, Ingram didn't do much of anything except short yardage. Between the 20s and short yardage. 2014, when he made the Pro Bowl, he had like 970 yards rushing. He had over 1,000 yards total. And then, starting in 2014, going all the way to 2017, every year he had 1,000 scrimmage yards. 2018, he had 800 scrimmage yards because he didn't play in every game. And then came back in 2019 with Baltimore and had another 1,200 yards total. No Chris Ivory? Dude, Chris Ivory's not even in my top 10. Chris Ivory's got to be the most overrated Saints running back of all time. Chris Ivory popped off. People got crazy over that 1 year and thought he was going to be amazing. And Chris Ivory was a solid running back and actually ended up having a good career across the league. Chris Ivory is not better than Pierre Thomas. He's not better than Mark Ingram. He's definitely not better than Alvin Kamara. He's not better than George Rogers. He's not better than Ricky Williams. So he was a good, solid running back. That's it. He wasn't special. He wasn't special. Taysom has thrown, ran, and caught TDs and covered punts and kickoffs. I would say is the all-time Saints X Factor. Demetrius, again, the only person who deserves that title is Darren Sproles. And as much as I love Taysom Hill, he's not better than Darren Sproles in that because Darren Sproles literally set NFL records as an X Factor. And that's not to say that Taysom Hill hasn't done amazing things, because he has. But I think we have forgotten, because it's been over a decade now, that Darren Sproles literally did something that nobody has ever done and has not broken yet. Like, people forget that. Darren Sproles literally set the NFL record for all-purpose yards. Darren Sproles was an X factor every game, not just some games. Like, no offense to Taysom Hill, but Taysom Hill is an X factor in some games. Darren Sproles is an X factor every single game. That's why he set the NFL record for all-purpose yards. Doesn't mean Taysom Hill's bad. He's just number 2 on the list. He's just number 2 on the list. Taysom is the best X factor, not Sproles. I mean, y'all can have that opinion. It's completely okay. This is an opinion thing. But I think the guy who literally set the current NFL record for all-purpose yards is the X factor. Taysom Hill's the X factor. Pete Carmichael doesn't know what to do with him. Well, guess what? The best head coach of your time also preferred Darren Sproles, because he also didn't use Taysom Hill every damn game. So it has nothing to do with Pete Carmichael. Yeah, Pete Carmichael underuses the Taysom Hill. But in terms of an X factor, every game, Darren Sproles. Darren Sproles, hands down. Being number 2 here is not bad. But you can't use Taysom Hill every down, every play. You could do that with Darren Sproles. That's the biggest difference. That's the biggest difference. You could use Darren Sproles on every play. You cannot do that with Taysom. When you have Taysom get too many touches, his efficiency goes way down. I've studied this. I've shown it on film. He has a lot of tendencies. There is a sweet spot for Taysom Hill. You don't want to not use him, but if you use him too much, he gets shut down. Because, for example, Taysom Hill has horrible ball carrier vision. He does. He does not have good ball carrier vision. You stack the box against Taysom, he's getting stopped. That's just a fact. But if you're using him situationally, he can open up a lot of doors. This is laughable, Jordan. I'll do the film study with you. I've done it plenty of times. There's a reason that Taysom does not hit the field 100% of the time. It's not because people don't know how to use him. He's not as good as the hype says he is, but he is still damn good, right? But that's the thing. Taysom Hill's awesome. Taysom Hill is awesome in situations. You're not running Taysom Hill 20 times and throwing 10 times and him catching 10 passes. That's just not going to happen. Has never happened, nor will it ever happen. Doesn't mean he's bad. This means that Darren Sproles, the literal setter of the record for all-purpose yards, is king. That's it. It just means the guy who holds the NFL record is the best X factor. And now we're debating on number 2. And it's not saying that the number 2 guy is bad. It just says that the number 2 guy is number 2. You know, that's it. Is it. It just says the number 2 guy is number 2. He does not believe that? No, I do. As someone who literally was trained to study tape and has done it for New Orleans for years, I 100% believe what I'm saying. 100%. And if you disagree, I'm completely okay with that. Completely okay. Like, that's fine. That's fine. I am okay. I'm not hurt at all. How do you feel about adding Hunter or Brockers to D-line? I think the Saints D-line has a lot of question marks, but I'll say the same thing that I kind of said and will say for the next couple months. You got a lot of young guys on that D-line. You want to give them as many opportunities and reps right now as you can. If you need a veteran, sign them towards the end of camp. You give the young guys a chance to show that they've grown, or giving them the chance to grow in contact, grow in practice. And if they don't do that, then you go get your veteran. Stack the box on Taysom Hill, it's over. Jordan, it's happened many times, and he's gotten stopped. It's actually one of his problems. The more he carries, the less effective he gets. Taysom Hill is best used in spurts. Do you even compare Kamara and Sproles, both are weapons? You actually can. Yeah, you definitely can compare them. Now, it's understanding context of what you're comparing, right? Like, Darren Sproles is the pinnacle of the New Orleans Saints scat back. You know, when you talk about the Saints using a committee system. Alvin Kamara is much closer to what Pierre Thomas's role was than what Darren Sproles' role was, but they also have a lot of overlap in that. That doesn't mean you can't compare them, but it does mean that you have to add context of what we're discussing when we're doing that, right? Again, it's so difficult to go through this because context is so important, but you still can find pretty consistent things that you can pull together. Like, how did Darren Sproles operate in the outside zone, inside zone running scheme, which is exactly what you see Alvin Kamara do, and then put those side by side. The difficulty of that is, well, in 2011, New Orleans was running more manpower, but they did eventually open up to outside zone, inside zone. So there are things you can compare, but you'd have to actually sit there and go side by side and see what they did. And it's fun to do, but it's going to be a time-consuming process, but I'm here for it. I'm here for it. Compare Sproles and Reggie Bush. And that's a tough one. It really is. That's a tough one. I mean, it says a lot that New Orleans went Darren Sproles over Bush. But still. Damn. That's a toughie. Anyway, good chats. Are you still going to do a film study on DeMarco Jackson? I am, at some point. But yes, that actually is a film study we've been saying we're going to do for weeks. We need to get around doing that. Reggie always bounced outside and lost yards. There is definitely, like, if you watch college ball, There is more opportunity to be an escape artist in college ball. The problem is when you make it to the NFL level, everybody's good. Like everybody's fast, everybody's strong. Even your backups are better than basically every college player in existence. So your ability to just bounce and go is a lot lower. So you need to have more of an elite field vision. You need to have more patience and timing. And it took him a while to do that. But I will say that Reggie Bush did get that. Like, given the opportunity to be a full-time back, Reggie Bush answered the call, just not in New Orleans. You know, when he went to Miami and they said, look, you got to be the guy, he was the guy. You know, he had, 3 straight years of 1,000 yards from scrimmage. He did it. But he never did in New Orleans because they never really asked him to. In New Orleans, he was always used as a situational committee guy. And then you also just had him not playing consistently. Like his rookie season, he was there every year. But I'm pretty sure there wasn't a single other year in New Orleans where Reggie Bush was there. 16 games. Bush best receiving back as a Saint. Gosh, that's so tough for me. That's tough for me. I mean, y'all bringing up good names to have these discussions about. That's tough for me, though. Reggie Bush, best receiving back as a Saint. I don't know. I really don't think I can say it. I think I got to give it to Sproles. Hell, I'd probably give it to Alvin Kamara before Reggie. And again, it goes about what do you want to say is an effective there? You're just going to use pure stats? Because if you just use pure stats, well, it's Darren Sproles over Reggie all day long. That's not even close. Like if you compare Darren Sproles with New Orleans versus Reggie Bush with New Orleans as a receiver, Darren Sproles was much better. Just in terms of pure stats. In fact, Reggie Bush was in New Orleans for 5 years. He had 12 receiving touchdowns. Just to give you a single number. Darren Sproles was in New Orleans 3 years, had 16 touchdowns. Darren Sproles averaged more reception or yards per reception than Reggie Bush. Darren Sproles had more yards than Reggie Bush. Like Darren Sproles was just more effective. But at the same time, was Darren Sproles overall a better running back? No, but he was a better X factor. But was he? So again, how are we bringing up the argument? Like, how are we framing the argument? You know, one thing that that Reggie Bush will always have is he won a ring, right? And then like my favorite Reggie Bush game is actually the playoff game against the Atlanta Falcons, where he single-handedly won that game. Like that was his game. Now I'm not saying that the Saints couldn't have won the game without him, because I do believe they could have. But the Arizona Cardinals game was Reggie Bush's game. Like he dominated that. That was him. And I can't take that away from him. Now, he didn't really do much in the Super Bowl, which is fine. Yeah, he was a contributor. But, yeah, he was the bring the wood game. That's a very big deal. But was he the best receiving running back? No, I'd probably make him third. I'd probably make him third. But that's just because I think when we think of these guys, we think they were better than they actually were. And even though we don't believe in using stats to, make opinions, they do kind of give you context to sit there and think about things again. And most people would think that Reggie Bush had consistently more receiving yards, more TDs, and more catches than Darren Sproles. But that's actually the opposite of the truth. Darren Sproles actually had that and was more consistently good with it. Doesn't mean that Reggie was bad, because he wasn't. But who was actually the more effective guy? Consistently Darren Sproles. He had a higher catch percentage. He had more touchdowns. He had more yards. He ran more diverse route schemes. He was better. So there you go. It's actually, I think the two biggest mistakes of Sean Payton's career was letting Malcolm Jenkins go and then letting Darren Sproles go. None of the Darren Sproles thing was a lot of behind the scenes crap. It was not as bad as Zion and Mariah, but still. Letting him go to Philly, where he then became an All-Pro and Pro Bowl multiple years in a row, really hurt this team. Really hurt the team. So, yeah, it's a good memory lane that we're just strolling down real quick. One of the best X factors for the Saints was Hokie. Seawalt, I can't really speak on that one. That's just I've not even been able to find a lot of tape, because that's early 80s, right? Shout out to him. Like, I know the name. but I can honestly say that I've probably seen 2 games of Hokie. That's just way before. I mean, hell, I wasn't even born. So, could very well be that guy. I have no idea. So, Jenkins thing is understandable. It was, but at the same time, hindsight's always 20/20. And then, like Big Wood says, what's the off-field stuff? Mostly Darren Sproles' wife. But I think that there's mistakes that get made, and I think letting Sproles go was a mistake. I think letting Jenkins go was a mistake. And I think you'd see the same thing from Peyton in terms of if he got asked who were the ones that shouldn't have got away, those are the ones. So some of those Saints games were even broadcast. I believe it. It's kind of like the Wilt game. Did Wilt's 100-point game actually happen? Who knows? I don't know. I can't tell you if Hokie was good because I ain't got all 22 on Hokie. So I just have to trust the old heads and say, sure, maybe. All right, I'm going to take this last one from King Troll, then we got to wrap it because we are over 1 hour. Though I've had a great time. Welcome Riley's opinion. If y'all have your opinions, feel free to bring them in. I love it. I love having the chats. It's great. You're allowed to believe whatever you want to believe, even if you believe Taysom Hill is better than Darren Sproles as an X factor of the New Orleans Saints. But last question says, best draft pick guess for 2023, long-term or short-term? Long-term, I believe Nick Saldiveri is going to be the best. I believe Nick Saldiveri is going to be the best. I also am known for being way too in love with offensive and defensive linemen. Either of the defensive linemen can pop off. Statistically, if we want to be a little bit negative here, statistically, one of them is going to fail. Statistically, one's going to fail. Who do I think would be the best short term? Kendra Miller. Especially if Alvin Kamara ends up serving a suspension. Kendra Miller. Nick Saldiveri, I'd be surprised if he's not starting within 2-3 years. Be very surprised. 4th round pick, let's see what happens. The model and Jake Hayner, I am completely indifferent to. Curious to see what happens. A.T. Perry should get looks, but maybe has a 20-30 reception year. Jordan Howden, I don't have any real expectations on right now. We'll wait and see. And then Isaiah Foskey. Well, Foskey should do well, but we'll see. We'll see. We'll see. Saldiveri taking Ruiz's spot? Probably not. Probably Pete. I really doubt Cesar Ruiz goes anywhere unless he just has a massive regression this year. But I've appreciated the chat. Y'all been amazing as always. Hoodats are amazing. Best franchise in the world. Best fans in the world. Hoodat, God bless. We'll catch you on the next one. Deuces, that's me. Join the Discord. Links in the chat. Links in the description. Appreciate y'all. Who is better, Chris Ivory or Kerry Robinson? Chris Ivory. Deuces.